The genre of roguelikes is one with a ton of room for variety. Games that play entirely different can still undeniably all fit under this wide umbrella. But rather than let these games coexist in harmony, I'm pitting them against each other to see which is best. Welcome to Rogues Gallery. We've got Enter the Gungeon, a top-down bullet hell, Hades, an isometric hack and slash, Dead Cells, a 2D action platformer, and Risk of Rain 2, a third-person shooter. And I'm going to be comparing what these games have in common, the staples of the roguelike genre, and seeing which comes out on top. Today, we're seeing which of these four games has the best secret boss fights. This is a follow-up to the previous episode of Rogues Gallery, where I talked about the normal boss fights in these games, so I recommend watching that one first if you haven't seen it. Now, I cast a bit of a wide net in what I considered a secret boss. Essentially, if I was even a bit uncertain how a boss should be categorized, I counted them as a secret boss. These secret bosses can be pretty cleanly split into two categories that I will call pop-up and gauntlet, which I will mark with these letters in the corner of the screen. A pop-up boss is one that appears suddenly in the middle of a run. Whether or not you fight them is generally determined by the boss or their trigger randomly spawning, though sometimes you're able to influence it. A gauntlet boss is one where you need to complete some sort of trial or gauntlet to get to them. They'll only face you after you've proven your worth. Usually this takes the form of the boss being at the end of a difficult stage, but they could also be spawned by tasks that you need to complete throughout the run. There's only a couple bosses here that don't perfectly fit into these categories. I'll make a note when that's the case. I feel like ranking this game fourth isn't really accurate. The games in third through first place all do what I would consider a good job with their secret boss fights. This game is so far behind that I could rank an additional 50 roguelikes and it would still be in a distant last place. Risk of Rain 2. Now, before I talk about what's horrid, let's quickly go over what's adequate and mediocre. Aurelionite's a glorified stone titan, but she's got enough style that it works. Once you've beaten her, she'll fight at your side in standard boss battles, which has little practical use, but it's fun. Also, the new DLC seems to be focused on her, which is cool, but it's developed by Gearbox and not Hoppu, so my expectations are low. The ally worship unit is really boring. It's just a soulless control unit with slightly changed attacks that's way too tanky. The spawning method of smashing 6 vulture eggs hits the sour spot of being tedious to do when you want to fight them, yet also easy to do accidentally when you don't. Yes, they give you a legendary item, but the other stage 4 options just let you buy one. I actually have surprisingly little to say about Voidling. They're just lame. The fight usually boils down to camping behind cover and plinking away at them from a distance. The mid-fight platforming is cool, but the unavoidable damage over time is dumb. And when you beat them, there's no ending cutscene, just a screen that looks pretty much identical to a game over. It's not a satisfying way to end a run. Somehow a goddamned kaiju titled Diviner of the Deep ends up being a much less exciting fight than the dude with a hammer. But in my opinion, for gauntlet-style secret bosses like this, the build-up matters almost as much as the boss itself, so let's finally go over some garbage. To get to the Voidling, you need to go through the Void Locus, which is mind-blowingly terrible. I do not think it was tested at all. If there is one word to describe it, it is incohesive. To clear the Void Locus, you charge up 4 of these deep void signals by staying in the marked area while enemies attack. It sounds fine. This style of objective is used a ton all throughout the game and works quite well. So why is it suddenly bad? Well, because 3 of the 4 enemies you fight, which are thrown at you en masse, explode when they die. And it's more than just a large damaging area of effect, it is an instant kill that bypasses all protections. And it's not just a simple explosion. Depending on the enemy type, they can be a cluster with random spread or track you down and fly towards you. And other void enemies can be killed in these explosions, which sounds like a benefit, but they will also explode, causing massive chains of instant kill AoEs. What is your only option here? Run away, out of the tiny area you need to stay in to charge the signal, and into the fog that does unavoidable damage over time. I cannot comprehend how a team that made such a great game put together this abomination with asset flip tier design. The artifact of dissonance is pretty much mandatory. And let me remind you, this is also you can go fight Voidling, who's just mediocre. But guess what? Void Locus isn't even the worst of the game's secret boss content. Those very familiar with the game will note that I've not covered a group of secret bosses. Grab some beads and obliterate yourself to face one of the Twisted Scavengers. 3 of them don't matter, because you're never going to go here just to avoid the 1 in 4 chance of facing Kip Kip. I am not exaggerating when I say that Kip the Gentle is the worst boss I have ever fought in any video game, ever. There are not proper words in the English language to describe how much self-healing he has. What's pretty much guaranteed to happen is that you just sit here shooting at them forever, as you cannot deal enough damage to kill them unless you can put out dozens of millions of points of damage in a single burst. I guarantee you that however bad you think it is, it's worse. At time of writing, I have 242 hours in Risk of Rain 2 and have done 425 runs, and nearly 20%, 1/5 of all damage I have ever dealt in my entire playtime was against Kip the fucking Gentle! I have fought them once. I have killed one of the other scavengers, Gur the Lucky, 3 times, and still not dealt even a quarter of the damage that I've dealt to Kip. In the end, I didn't even fucking kill them! The fight just went on until they glitched out, slid off screen, and died out of bounds. I have never, in my tens of thousands of hours of gaming, seen a worse boss fight, and thus, Risk of Rain 2 is in a very, very distant last place. Alright, now we're talking about games that do a good job with secret bosses. From here, it is a tight race, and I really had a hard time placing what's left. In third place is Hades. In my initial plans for this video, I actually had Hades in first place. It has one single secret boss and does them perfectly. But as a rule of thumb, a bad secret boss is going to drag a game down less than a bad standard boss, since the former is hidden and the latter is on the main path. So Hades only having one good secret boss, even if it is technically a perfect track record, only nets it third place. Kip the Gentle breaks this rule because they get in the way of facing other secret bosses and they are so mind-blowingly bad. Happy thoughts. We're talking about Karen. We like Karen. Throughout the game, they are but a humble shopkeep, selling you wares for obols as you progress along your journey. They never speak, but it's clear there's some genuine camaraderie between you two. So suddenly fighting a steadfast ally without warning is a shocking twist. Sure, you can grow close to some bosses in the game, but Karen's the only one who is a friend by default, and the fight is a change of pace. The way you trigger this fight is frankly hilarious. Sometimes, under certain circumstances, there will be a bag of gold laying around his shop. If you walk over to it, you get the option to borrow it. And in response, Karen drags your ass to Erebus and starts swinging. Since this is a complete surprise, there's a good chance you get killed. The dialogue surrounding this encounter is amazing, some of my favorite in the game, which is an incredibly high bar to clear. Zagreus' perspective is that of the player. If I wasn't supposed to take that gold, why did he leave it out right where I could touch it? Which is 100% what your mindset was when you took the money. Everyone else looks at it from a logical perspective, ignoring the tropes of being in a video game. It's his shop and that's his money, why would you think you can just take it? They all make fun of you for being a petty thief who got your ass beat by the person you stole from. But then Hermes mentions that he made a bet with Karen that you could beat him twice in a row. If you weren't going to borrow more money before, you certainly will now. Hermes is a bro, and you've got a bet to help him win. Once you know what you're getting into, the fight is pretty manageable. Karen's attacks are simple and very easy to understand, which is important for a secret boss fight since you're generally going to be going up against them less frequently than a standard boss fight, so it should take less time to form a basic understanding of their moveset. That doesn't mean they should be easy though, and Karen isn't. He hits insanely hard. There is nothing else in the game that takes massive chunks out of your health like he does. I think this is a perfect balance for a secret boss. It's easy to figure out what you need to do, but actually doing it is tricky, and if you mess up, you get punished. Karen is interesting as well in that he doesn't scale at all, despite the fact you can fight him anywhere from early Tartarus to late Elysium. So why would you ever take him on early and not at the latest possible chance, since it's only going to get easier the further in the run you are? Well, it's because his reward is brilliant. If you beat him, you get a 20% discount on all wares and well boons for the rest of the run. The savings add up very quickly, especially since you also get to keep the borrowed money. This is such a great reward because it will always be super useful no matter your build, and the sooner you get it, the more you save. So you're incentivized to fight him as early as possible, leading to this perfect balance of risk and reward. As you get more confident in your ability to fight him, you can take him on earlier and earlier. Karen is a standout secret boss. I'd honestly say that he's the best executed boss in the entire game. They had a goal when making him and nailed it. You can see why I originally had Hades in first place. But in the end, the game still only has a single secret boss. Before we move on to second place, I want to talk about another game. This video's sponsor, BlazBlue Entropy Effect. Now, I've said before that I will only take sponsorships from products I truly like and genuinely recommend, and Entropy Effect is no exception. As you can probably tell, I like roguelites, and if you're watching this, I bet you do too. So here's a really good one. When I first tried the game out, I was visiting my father for the holidays. I installed it on my Steam Deck and figured I'd give it a go as I laid in bed. I then proceeded to play until my Steam Deck died and thoroughly messed up my sleep schedule. If you're unfamiliar with the series, don't worry. The story is something entirely its own. A separate canon where you're thrown into a mystery and have to try and figure out the truth while presented with various conflicting agendas. But alongside the intrigue, there's a lot of quaint charm. Like, look at these guys! Look at this big dude! And instead of a talk button, there's a say hello button. It's really cute and strikes a good balance. Where the BlazBlue comes in is the gameplay itself. You can control 10 characters from the series, which are incredibly distinct. You've got Noelle's flippy gun fu, Hakumen's slow face tanking, Jin's quick freezing attacks. It's a great level of variety. Everyone can enjoy the game since new players can follow the self-contained story and BlazBlue fans can enjoy playing as their favorite characters, all lovingly crafted and a ton of fun. My personal favorite aspects of the game are the legacy Evo types and the potentials. The game has hundreds of these potentials, which are upgrades you get through your run that range from passive buffs to new moves to new uses for existing moves. They're designed for building fun synergies and the game isn't stingy with them, so it gets pretty crazy what you can accomplish. It means each run has a strong sense of its own identity, and then once the run is done, it's saved as a legacy Evo type. When you start another run, you pick 2 of these to equip, which gives an active power, a passive, and then a couple of the abilities you picked up on your run. This is genius! Equipping past runs adds so much depth. It lets you set up synergies across multiple runs. It means you look at the entire game through a different lens. I could do a whole video just on this system alone. So yeah, I heartily recommend BlazBlue Entropy Effect. If you like the games I'm talking about in this video, especially Dead Cells and Hades, absolutely give it a look. It is a great game. Man, this ranking was hard to settle on. Third through first are all so close, but in the end, I have to give second place to Dead Cells. Part of me really wanted to put it in first because of how much of a step up the secret bosses are compared to the regular bosses, which are pretty damn bad. I said in my video on standard boss fights that the issue with the bosses in Dead Cells is that they commonly throw out a bunch of overlapping simple attacks. Sometimes this is brain dead easy to play around, other times it's really difficult, but it's almost never fun. It feels as if very little care was put into making the attacks intersect in ways that are enjoyable to play around. But when a boss uses more complicated attacks that come at you one at a time, they are much more fun. And the best example of this is the Queen. She's an amazing boss, without a doubt the best in the game. Yes, I know I said the Giant was the best boss in the other video, I was saying that he was the best standard boss. Queen is the best overall. Her attacks may come one at a time, but they're thrown out super quickly. You only have a split second to react, yet they all have tells that are very clear visually, which makes reacting feasible. It also lets you get a basic understanding of her moveset, which, as I said before, is very important for a secret boss. But what really makes her special is that her fighting style is a reflection of yours. She parries you, reflects your projectiles, and crosses you up. A great boss fight feels like a dance, and this one absolutely does, which is especially fitting considering the story here. She was your queen. This is a merciless battle between former lovers, and the fight feels like it. The vibes overall are great. In her few lines of dialogue, she expresses so much character. She's the reasonable one, not letting you leave the island because of the risk that would pose, but she also has a hell of a temper. There are a bunch of ways you can enrage her in the fight, which makes her start throwing out special moves willy-nilly. And if you die before doing enough damage to her, she will revive you, healing you fully at the cost of 10% of her own health just because she wasn't done kicking your ass. So fucking amazing. I could keep going on about all the stuff that this fight does well, but I need to talk about the other secret bosses in this game. Such as the Servants, who I have some issues with. Not counting the Collector, Dead Cells has 3 options for a boss fight to end your run on. To get to Dracula or the Hand of the King, you beat the tier 2 boss, play through one last biome, and then face them. But for the Queen, there's an extra step. After you beat the tier 2 boss and go through the biome, you then face the servants. Once you've beaten them, then you go to the queen. And the big issue here is that the servants are the more difficult fight. So if you beat them, you're most likely going to beat the queen. It undermines this epic climax since your victory is kind of a foregone conclusion. And since the queen is the best boss in the game, that means the servants are worse than her. And it isn't fun to be gatekept out of an amazing boss fight by a worse one. I will say I do think the servants are fun, I generally enjoy facing them, but there is a lot of poor design here. The way the boss works is that you climb a tower, then fight a servant, then climb the next bit of the tower with a new servant joining the fray. Repeat until you're fighting all three at once. This would be a really cool idea for a fight if Dead Cells did not suck when it comes to verticality. Wall climbing and ledge grabbing are finicky and you can only attack right in front of you, so you can see how that leaves this fight feeling clunky. And the camera is just too damn zoomed in! You can barely see where you're going, and since the tower's layout is random, it means you have to just guess what the best way up is, and it's very possible to simply guess wrong and get heavily punished for it. There's also other annoying aspects. It tends to drag on, the breakable walls are inconsistent, and during the final fight, they teleport in and out so much that it starts to feel like whack-a-mole. All of this just leaves me wishing that it wasn't there at all, so it could get out of the way and I could get to the amazing queen fight. I feel like the best solution would be to remove the third servant entirely and just make them a tier 2 boss. You could still be required to face them to get to the queen, but they would feel less like an arbitrary roadblock. The last secret boss is the Collector. On 5 boss stem cells, the highest difficulty, after you beat the Hand of the King, you can then make your way into the Astrolab biome. Get through there, and you're faced with the Collector, who had been your means of unlocking new items for most of the game. This is cool, but I feel like it loses some impact because it's really difficult to get this far on 5 BSC, so by the time you're facing him, you'll probably have gotten used to his replacement. I don't really have a ton to say about the Collector. He's kind of an odd boss, but I think he's quite good overall. He's structurally very different from every other boss fight in the game, meaning it can be migraine-inducing if you don't use his hidden training room to practice and instead try to learn him in actual runs. You're put entirely on the defensive and then given lengthy chances to damage him. It feels more like WarioWare micro games than a Dead Cells boss fight. But once you understand how he works, it's fun. However, I really dislike the Astrolab. The layout is wonky, the enemies are annoying, and like the lighthouse, there's a ton of verticality with the camera too zoomed in. Also, pet peeve, you need to go through a secret area to progress. If it's mandatory, it's not secret. The whole thing just feels very unrefined. Still, even with the flaws, it's a damn good showing overall, especially compared to the base game. Part of me didn't want to do it. It was too obvious, too easy, but I couldn't ignore what I held true in my heart. Enter the Gungeon is yet again in first place. It's not surprising that the game I ranked first for normal bosses also ranked first for secret bosses, but it's actually kind of complicated. You see, I would say that the average quality of the secret bosses is noticeably lower than the standard bosses. The worst normal boss is Amoconda, and I wouldn't even call them bad, just imbalanced and flawed. However, there are a couple secret boss fights that I think are just straight up crap. But having some bad secret bosses isn't that surprising when there's so many of them. There are 5 levels in the game, and a secret level after each one, all of which have a unique boss. Then you've got additional bosses with the Door Lord, Advanced Dragon, and Glitched Beholster. Also, I consider all the Gungeon Pass to be secret boss fights as well, meaning there are 14 secret bosses compared to the 13 standard ones. Since a bad secret boss is easy to ignore, most of the time, a quantity over quality approach kinda works. That's why Hades is in 3rd place with a 100% success rate. That's not to say Gungeon lacks quality though, there are some damn good secret bosses in here, such as the Lich. He's a brutal 3-phase fight with the most ridiculous patterns. He requires much tighter timing and spacing than any other boss fight, and it works perfectly for the true final boss. I'm also a sucker for boss fights where reality falls apart in the final phase. I think it would be the best in this game full of amazing boss fights, if not for bullet hell. Yep, once again an amazing boss is held back by the gauntlet leading up to them. The problem with bullet hell is that there's no shop and no chests. There's nothing to gain from actually exploring the floor. You just want to get to the boss as soon as you can, so you're left entirely at the whims of the random generation. On a standard floor, it doesn't really matter the order you discover things in, since you'll want to clear the whole floor before taking on the boss. But since you want the boss room ASAP in Bullet Hell, it means it's purely a matter of randomly picking doors and hoping for the best like a bad Mario Maker level. And since you can't go to the shop and replenish your ammo before the boss fight, you want to save your best guns for the Lich and fight through Bullet Hell with the lame benchwarmer guns you've collected over your run. But god damn it, it's worth trudging through all that for the awesome Lich fight. Oh god, there's still so many bosses to cover. Quick lightning round. The only boss in any of these games where I equally like them and the gauntlet leading up to them. Fun attacks, but dear god, he has way too much health. More than the High Dragon. Really cool, I just wish their spawn wasn't so rare. Terrible in theory, amazing in execution. Surprisingly fun and just the right level of rare. But the half dozen mimics that spawn after are annoying. A rare combination of an amazing gauntlet and a bad boss. He just feels slapped together. Cool idea, it's fun when a boss you mastered long ago starts putting up a fight again, but they're such a pain to spawn and you gain absolutely nothing fighting them after you've beaten them once. Wait, hold on, I feel like I'm missing... Oh, you're kidding me, man, I don't want to redo that whole section.
Alright, tag me in. I've got a personal vendetta against this rodent.
sl1ppey, my fellow internet video game talkie guy? Alright then, go ahead.
The rat fight can only be described in one word: cathartic. It's a chance to get revenge on that conniving thief that's been an ever-looming nuisance for the dozens of hours you've spent up to this point. With him swiping that ammo box or gun you accidentally left behind and taunting you with a note calling you an oaf or a nerd or whatever, having the opportunity to teach that smug, sniveling coward a lesson in humility makes this not just another boss fight. This time, it's personal. Naturally, routing the rat isn't such a simple task. You have to farm some money from a few runs by dumping 1,000 shells for the Nod key, just to then unlock the ability to purchase it for 115 shells in subsequent runs. This practically requires you to trudge your way through the sewers to have enough money to buy this key during any attempt at this boss. You then have to wander around on floor 3 looking for a hidden hatch that requires you to have both a spare normal key and 2 blanks just to find the damn lair. Once inside, you then need to follow the correct directions given by 6 notes that drop randomly out of chests. These notes also replace the loot in those chests, by the way. Once you find your way through this Lost Woods knockoff, dealing with some frankly mean enemy combos along the way, you then are finally ready to take on the cheesy charlatan himself. The rat, however, does not mess around. He's arguably one of the hardest bosses in the game that will put your mastery of positioning and dodge rolling to the test. With his overall massive health pool, 2 distinct phases, and attacks with bullet patterns that leave very little room for error, you are not going to take this guy out on the first try, and will be making the long trek back to his lair over and over before you get a handle on everything. But once you do, and that last sliver of health on that Metal Gear wannabe disappears, it feels so... What do you mean there's a third phase? What is this, Punch-Out? Huh? Oh god, what are the controls? How do I hit this guy? There's a time limit? 2 minutes? How many times do I have to do? Yeah, I'm gonna need some help on this one.
Tag me back in, sl1pp. Your maze is nothing but busy work after the player's gone through it a single time. Your second phase has some straight up tedious bullet patterns, and your Punch-Out gimmick was done better by Deltarune! Alright, and now let's talk paths. These are weird because they're really not secret bosses, but they're certainly not standard bosses. I decided that they fit more into this video because you do need to forge the bullet that can kill the past before you can experience them. They're a really cool idea, and I think the execution is rather solid overall. They're definitely not as good as the standard boss fights, but that's such a high bar that isn't saying much. It can stink going to a simple basic loadout right after a crazy run with a ton of wacky synergies, but this means that these bosses can be designed with your gear in mind. It's also fun to finally see what mistakes the characters regret and why they entered the Gungeon in the first place, since you'll likely have played all of them quite a bit by the time you're finally facing their pasts. Even if the story really doesn't matter, it's hard not to be invested in these guys after all the time you spent playing as them. Alright, here's another quick lightning round of what I think of the pasts. Bit simple, but it's a fun fight and a charming Hotline Miami reference. The easiest past without a doubt, but it's at least the fun kind of stop, as opposed to boring. I don't like the format change. It's not too dissimilar to the base gameplay, but a pass should be a test of the skills we've been honing up to this point, not a total mix-up. Fun fight with the best presentation of any past, but your ammo is a bit tight since I feel like too many minions get spawned. The melee-only aspect means it's another one that uses a different skill set than what the run has required thus far. It also drags on too long. Another one that's fun yet easy, though this one feels more earned since the robot is such a difficult character, so you needed to play well to get here. So cool. The actual true final boss of the game, and it is a strong note to end on. Insanely difficult, but well crafted with banger music. I think it just being the Lich's first phase is the correct choice, but I wish we got to see glitched second and third phases somewhere in the game. So yeah, it's really not surprising that Gungeon ended up having the largest amount of high quality secret bosses when they brought so damn many to the table. But it wasn't just a numbers game. Risk of Rain 2 had the second highest amount with 7 secret bosses, and Hades still vastly outdid them with a single one. Thanks for watching, folks, and thanks to sl1ppey for his part in the video. Go check him out, his stuff is great and he talks about roguelites a lot. And finally, thank you to all my patrons, with an extra special thanks to Audie T, Amy Lech, Connor W. Jones, Ilya Kukushkin, and Samuel Wagner.